Many of the past recipients of the Ramaciotti Awards have spoken about the importance of receiving grants early in their careers and how the grants have enabled them to buy equipment or start a piece of work that became critical in their later successes.
The very first grant I got from the Ramaciotti Foundation was in either 1985 or 1986 and was to provide facilities, tissue culture, cabinet and tissue culture incubators to support the cell biology research.
I had a lot of help from the Ramaciotti Foundation over the years to work on bone cells and particularly on how high blood calcium occurred in cancer.
Over the years, the Colling Institute's received more than 10 grants from the Ramaciotti Foundations. They've contributed to large pieces of equipment, so they've all really filled a vital gap in our funding for some major pieces of equipment.
I received my first and only Ramaciotti grant in 1981, which was very early in my career. It was a very important grant because it covered some of the early carbohydrate work that I was doing in the immune system, and at that stage the work was quite controversial and I needed seed funding to further investigate my early discoveries.
Early in my career, when I was a very young man, I received a project grant really for equipment from the Ramaciotti Foundation that helped fund the chemical measurement of the transmitter from the sympathetic nerves. It was absolutely fundamental to my research and got me started.
Well, I've received quite a lot of support from the individual grants back in the early 90s, which were around about $15,000 each. And they were immensely helpful because they enabled me to plan and carry out research in areas which the standard Medical Research Council and the Australian Research Council bodies would not fund.
Most of our funding comes from what we call national competitive grants. That's from NHNMRC and the Australian Research Council and so on. But these really just fund the add-on costs of doing work. So there are many basic underlying costs which are not funded by these grants, and it's the charitable foundations like the Ramaciotti Foundations that fill these important gaps. So the other important role is that they allow you to do more blue sky or blue sky research, by which I mean research where we don't already know what the major outcomes are going to be. The big funding bodies never like to fund that kind of research because it's high risk. So it generally falls to the smaller charities and philanthropic organisations to provide funding for that more exciting work, which often leads to more unexpected results. So I think the charities and the foundations fill an absolutely vital niche in Australian funding.
I know that there are a number of pieces of equipment, vital pieces of equipment that I was able to use that had been only become possible because of some of the Ramaciotti equipment grants to some of the heads of the labs that I was lucky enough to work in. So that made a huge difference. Being able to access, one of the only flow cytometers in Australia early on was really opened my eyes to what was possible, and it also gave me a competitive advantage when I went out into the world stage, that I wasn't sort of overwhelmed by new technology because I'd had a chance to get familiar with it firsthand.